2022 cycle, we have our first candidate who found it worthy to visit Blount County. Persistent, they'll all find it necessary to visit Blount County one way. Because, as we all remember, we had the second highest voter turnout increase in 2018. We were in the top 10 in 2020 for the state of Tennessee. All the work that you all are doing on the ground every day through the cycles. So today we have with us Dr. Jason Martin, who's candidate for governor for the state of Tennessee. Dr. Martin is a father, husband, doctor, business owner, and obviously an advocate for Tennesseans. He is on his 95 county tour right now. He just came from Blount, and they had about as many people, I'm sure we have more, who turned out for him. And he'll be going to Knoxville tomorrow. But he has made a commitment to visit all counties in the state of Tennessee, which I think is important, and I know we all do too. So as you will see, there is a sign-up sheet going around so you can get on his mailing list to get more information about the campaign and to discover anything about his platform that you might not hear today if you forget to ask those questions. And there's also a donation jar right here. I will remind you, as I'm sure he will, that in each cycle and primary is one and then general is another. There's a $50 maximum cash donation. You're welcome to that. And if you have your checkbook, then you can max out. And so that's there. But let's see, actually there is one, a little bit of housekeeping for local quickly.
Sure.
Tonight at 6 p.m., remember that the Blount County Commission is meeting and they're voting on a couple of resolutions. One is the perpetual 2A stuff that is brought forward, and next is a development and planning about the subdivision that's being planned down off Old Niles Ferry, and they're discussing an ad hoc planning commission committee. So just in case you want to bounce from here to there. Otherwise, without further ado, welcome Jason Martin, candidate for governor of Tennessee.
All right. Thank you for the kind introduction. It's really good to be here this afternoon. I told whoever is responsible for the weather, thank you. It feels like fall finally. Yeah, you heard a little bit about who I am and what I do. I wear a lot of different hats. I'm a husband to Jennifer. And Jennifer Martin is a dermatologist in Middle Tennessee. She's the smart one. I'm a girl dad. I have 3 young daughters, ages 14, 12, and 10, Lily, Ace, and Blaney. I'm a critical care doctor. So I work in the intensive care units of hospitals, taking care of the sickest folks in the building. I don't have an office. I'm only in the hospital, in the ICUs. And finally, I'm a fellow Tennessean. I've been here for the last 20 years in Tennessee, and have my family here and put down roots and fell in love with the people and the place, and proud to call it home. I've been on the front lines of healthcare in this state for the last 20 years or so, and it's only recently that we've started calling it the front lines. It was just a job for the most of the time, but unfortunately, we've been having to battle COVID for the last 18 months, and it's been terrible for everybody. I know it's been terrible for us as practitioners. It's been terrible for you all as members of your community. We've had to experience a lot of death, and that is part of what brought me to the table. Part of why I'm here talking to you today. I work up in Sumner County, which is one of the ring counties north of Nashville, smaller rural communities, and I work at a 100-bed hospital. 18 ICU beds. Not like the big 600-700 beds that you have in the cities downtown. Small hospitals, and even in our small hospitals, we've had to say goodbye to hundreds of patients. Over 300 patients in my group we've had to say goodbye to. That's been a life-changing experience. And in my opinion, not all that life could have been saved. It's a pandemic after all. But with some leadership, with some decision-making, we could have saved a lot of those folks. We could have kept our kids in school safely. We could have kept our businesses open and thriving. And instead, the lack of leadership that I saw with COVID-19, it brought me to the table. The lack of leadership that I see in COVID-19, it's out there in other aspects of life in Tennessee as well. And we're going to talk about it. But that's what brings me to the table. That's why I'm running for governor of our great state. I wanted to tell you a little bit about what it looks like to say goodbye to somebody in the ICU, something we've had to do, like I said, so many times. It's holding up iPads while moms and dads and brothers and sisters wail into that screen and watch their loved ones take a last breath from afar. And we hold their hands and we pray with them, but it's a life-changing experience to go through something like that. And as those experiences accrued, there was one experience last summer where I said, enough is enough. Somebody needs to stand up and start speaking the truth. And it took me down a pathway initially of advocacy and ultimately to consider running for office. But that was when we had to call a young girl who was only 14 years old, and she was the only English speaker in her house. And so she had to receive the burden of learning from us that her daddy had died in the middle of the night. 14, same age as my oldest daughter, Lily. Breaks my heart. We cried together. I didn't speak her language, but I knew what she was saying to her family that was waiting on the other side of the phone. I could hear them wailing too. It didn't have to be this way, guys. Politics over people is killing us. It didn't have to be this way. A call like that one has been made 14,000 times nearly in the state of Tennessee since this started. 14,000 empty chairs at dinner tables tonight. 14,000 broken families. And I'm telling you, it didn't have to be this way. Do you guys remember a few months ago when it seemed like COVID was getting better? I don't. We experienced that in Nashville, in Middle Tennessee. In fact, our hospital right now, which is more than 50% filled with COVID patients. Crazy that one diagnosis is filling the hospital to that extent, but that's the way it is right now. Before that all happened, earlier in the summer, we were down to 0 patients. I actually took some of the equipment that I wear, the powered, respiratory equipment, and boxed it up. I was like, man, I can't wait to show the grandkids what that, Grandpa had to wear. Little did I know, 2 weeks later, we'd be taking it back out and using it again. But we missed some opportunities to lead in those moments when COVID had relented. We missed some opportunities. Governor Lee, as you recall, was on national television in late May. Kids don't get COVID. They don't get sick from COVID. They don't need to wear masks. Politics over people, parroting nationally inspired talking points. Politics over people. What do we have now? Let's look at the data. We have recently the highest per capita rates of new COVID-19 infections in the entire world briefly last week. Tennessee, Florida, and Kosovo. A third of our new cases are in school-aged children. 6 children under age 20 died of COVID-19 in August in Tennessee. It's killing people. It's politics over people. Governor Lee fired the state's chief vaccine officer in the middle of a pandemic. Pure politics. He's failed to speak out when people in the legislature say that the vaccine is experimental or gene therapy or not efficacious. And that makes him complicit. Politics over people. He had no plan to help schools guide themselves safely through this pandemic as Delta was running through our communities. Teachers and students were left unprotected, and so school boards were desperately, individually trying to solve the problem since there was no statewide plan. And what does he do? He uses his emergency powers, his executive powers, to weaken the state's response to the emergency. That is pure politics over people. And we can do better. And that's why I'm running our campaign for governor, because we can do better. I know we can. I grew up down in Mobile, Alabama. Are you guys familiar with Mobile? Have you guys been down there at all? It's down the coast. It's a pretty rural community, a lot like the rural communities here in Tennessee. And, the values that we grew up with is that if there's a problem in the community, you help each other out. You go all in for each other. You love your neighbor. We need to get back to that. That's Tennessee's values too, right? Volunteerism, community. That's who we are as Tennesseans. That's the kind of Tennessee I'm willing to fight for, and that's the kind of Tennessee I bet you're willing to fight for too. to tell you a little bit about my parents, since we're talking about where I grew up. My mom and dad were both hardworking folks. My mom and dad got married super young. My mom was 17, my dad was 20. They had me when my mom was 20, and my mom went straight out of high school and went to work. She worked for an oral surgeon's office and did telephone calls and kept up charts and all kind of work around the office. My dad and his brother were the first in the family to go to college. Super proud of him. My dad, he was working so hard, he was on the 6-year plan to get his 4-year degree, but he did it. He had all kind of odd jobs. He worked at Jiffy June Poultry, hosing out trucks at the end of the day. He worked repairing bowling pin machines, return machines at a bowling alley. He worked at Uncle Joe's Body Shop, sanding cars. Hardworking man, got his degree. While they were working, and when I would come home from school, I was what they called a latchkey kid back in the 80s. So I would come home and, let myself in, and my aunts and uncles chipped in to help raise me. My grandparents chipped in to help raise me. We had a community park down the street from the neighborhood where I grew up that had a little park counselor, so the neighborhood kids could play games and stuff together. We had a reasonable public school that gave us educational opportunities that we needed. So it was on the backs of my hardworking parents, my contributing family, my community, great public schools, that we were able to change the trajectory of our family in a generation. Every Tennessean deserves that opportunity. Every Tennessean deserves that opportunity. We should be investing in our children's future so that they can pull themselves up and be successful. And I went on to medical school and college and ended up at Vanderbilt. That's how I ended up in Tennessee in 2002, doing my medical training. After working there, I had the pleasure of serving at the VA Nashville and serving our veterans. Was one of the great privileges of my career. And then after that, went on to work as a faculty member at Meharry Medical College, which is the oldest historically black medical college in the United States. And I had a hand, a part in teaching, primarily minority medical students who then go out and serve their communities as well and pay it forward. I had a chance to serve residents of North Nashville who are primarily, are generally underserved as compared to other folks in the community. So it was a great experience. And most recently, as I told you, I've been up in Sumner County. And whether it's down in Mobile, or working in the neighborhoods of North Nashville, or working up in the counties, in the rural communities, I've learned that there are hard-working folks all over the place. But unfortunately, there's another pandemic. There's a pandemic of politicians working harder against us, making life more difficult than it needs to be. One of my great, he was a friend of mine, but also a mentor in critical care. His name was Art Wheeler. He gave me a saying that I've kind of held on to, that Jason, nothing ruins an argument like data, right? I like that. So let's look at the data. If you don't believe me that politicians are working harder against us. Let's talk about education in this state, right? There have always been haves and have-nots in this state, in education and in healthcare, but it's all been made worse by COVID-19. It's just ripped the Band-Aid off, right? So everybody can see it. We are 47th in the nation when it comes to per capita spending on our public school students. That's shameful. That's shameful, especially when we're sitting on billions and billions of dollars in a rainy day fund in Nashville. And look, if you think it's not raining in public education right now, check your radar. We need to be supporting our students, providing them with opportunities. We need to be supporting our teachers, providing them with the resources to do their job successfully. We need to be amping up our support for public education. And they'll say, oh, well, we're fully funding the education formula. I'm telling you, the formula is not right. The formula is not right. There have always been haves and have-nots in healthcare in this state. I saw it working in public health at Meharry Medical College at National General Hospital. I had a patient who decided to forego a lung biopsy because the patient did not want to get saddled with medical debt. I'm positive it was a cancer. It ended up taking the patient's life. It was potentially treatable and maybe curable with surgery, but the patient did not want to saddle the family with debt, and so they chose to die instead. Those are real life decisions that are actually happening in the state of Tennessee right now. What can we do about it? We need more money in the system. We do. We need to participate in Medicaid expansion. Guys, we're missing $1 billion. $1 billion a year. And what does that mean? Medicaid expansion is not a handout. Medicaid expansion is not a giveaway. Medicaid expansion is affordable insurance for hardworking Tennesseans, for people who are out there in two-income families working hourly wages with a family trying to make ends meet. This is how they get affordable health care insurance. And people say, well, listen, I want people out there working. I don't want people taking gimmies. You want people out there working, you got to be healthy. You can't have a bad back. You can't be so short of breath that you can't be out there working. You have to provide health care for folks so they can be strong enough to go out there and support their families. And that's what we're going to do in Tennessee. We're going to get Medicaid expansion. Since 2012, how many hospitals do you think have closed in Tennessee since 2012? 14. Primarily in rural communities. Where the populations are underinsured or uninsured to a much greater extent than they are around the cities like we are now. Those are the people who need the health care the most right now. And you say, well, listen, I can't help it that those folks' hospital closed. Yeah, we can. We can participate in Medicaid expansion. And here's what Medicaid expansion does. It brings more money into the system. It provides incentives for people to set up shop and set up, hospitals. And that money doesn't just disappear. It employs people, right? It sets up an environment. Well, now you've got investments in education that are raising, students who are more highly skilled. You've got healthcare, so there's not a healthcare desert in a community. Now, businesses are talking about wanting to come and set up shop. If they have their choices about where they're going to set up, it's not going to be in a place where the nearest healthcare facility is 3 counties away. It's just not going to happen. So if you want a strong economy, if you want a capable workforce, you have to make investments in education and you have to make investments in healthcare, and then the strong economy comes after it. It's all tied together. So, we've talked about healthcare, we've talked about education, we've got opportunities for leadership and other aspects in this state as well. We need to reform our antiquated cannabis laws in this state. Absolutely we do. I'm telling you as a medical provider, there are medical conditions that benefit from medical cannabis, and we need to have it approved yesterday. We need to talk about criminal justice reform. We need to talk about creating an economy that works for everyone, and that's why we need to focus on education and healthcare. So my wife, Jennifer, and I, we wake up every morning, and just like you guys do, and we think about our families, and we think about our community, and we ask ourselves, what can we do to move the ball down the court? What can we do to make things better? And we don't have all the answers. I mean, I've been doctorate for 20 years. I've not been talking in front of folks like this. I've not been, just filling out details of policy platforms my entire life. But here's what I'm committed to doing. I'm committed to listening. I'm committed to learning. I'm committed to filling in the gaps. I'm guided by good, strong, progressive principles, which I happen to think are Tennessee principles. Principles of caring about our neighbors, volunteerism, community. And so I'm going to go around and listen to folks and hear about what you all think about in the morning and what keeps you up at night. Because I'm convinced that when we act together, we can make a better Tennessee. That when we focus on education for everyone, Tennessee thrives. I didn't plan that. But it's a nice dramatic finish. When we focus on affordable health care for folks, Tennessee thrives. When we create an economy that works for everyone, regardless of whether you live in Memphis or Mountain City, regardless of the color of your skin, or whether you have a little bit of money in the bank or more than you know what to do with, Tennessee thrives. Together, Tennessee thrives. Thank you guys. I'm glad to take your questions. Appreciate it.